This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. Japan formally seeks exemption from America's looming 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium imports set to kick in next month. But what will it take to change President Trump's mind? Now, China's foreign ministry slams the latest U.S. Navy transit through the Taiwan Strait, the first under the Trump administration. Now, Beijing's top diplomat Wang Yi heads to London to reboot the UK-China strategic dialogue, signaling warming ties with Britain's new Labour government. And that ceasefire deal in Gaza hangs in the balance. Israel's prime minister warns of resuming the war if Hamas doesn't free hostages by Saturday. And Beijing appears to be stepping up efforts to ring-fence state-backed property developers. Reports suggesting a plan to bail out troubled China Wang Yi is in the works. Also in East Asia tonight, China launches a new carrier rocket designed to send out bigger batches of satellites in one go. Observers say it's a step towards countering Elon Musk's Starlink.
I'm Roland Lim at India Energy Week in New Delhi. Coming up, we speak to the chairman of Kawasaki Heavy Industries and we talk about Trump tariffs and geopolitical tensions.
Japan has asked to be exempted from U.S. President Donald Trump's latest tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. Well, the industry minister says the formal request has been sent to Washington. Now, Mr. Trump imposed similar tariffs during his first term in a bid to curb what he called unfair competition. His predecessor, Joe Biden, gave Japan an exception, allowing it to sell up to 1.25 million tons of steel to the U.S. each year without duties. Well, that exemption, known as a tariff quota, will be revoked, according to a U.S. Trade Ministry official. The latest developments underscore the complex nature of U.S.-Japan trade ties, especially in the steel and aluminium sectors, which are key components in the auto industry. Now, for more on this, we have Michio Ishida. She is standing by live from Tokyo. Mitch, first up, let's talk about Japan's reaction to the 25% tariffs the U.S. Has these plans to impose on the steel and aluminium imports.
Well, analysts here were not particularly surprised because, Mr. Trump, as we know, is unpredictable and he was, giving hints of slapping tariffs, but we didn't know on what kind of components, elements exactly. But, remember Mr. Ishiba and Mr. Trump met in Washington on Friday, and during that time, 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum was not mentioned. And in fact, Mr. Ishiba said back in Tokyo, they didn't even talk about tariffs. But Mr. Trump did stress during his joint news conference the trade deficit U.S. had with Japan was worth $100 billion. And he hinted he will work on that very quickly. So Tokyo has been cautious. And bang, he announced 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum on imports from all countries. Now, the Japanese government was alarmed. Mr. Ishiba told the parliament his government will ask Washington to make Japan an exception, and it did, according to Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi. Now, during the Joe Biden administration, U.S. had a no-tariff policy on Japanese steel imports of up to 1.25 million tons. And in 2024, Japan's steel exports to the U.S. did not reach that amount, so it was no tariffs.
Now, Michio, we know that Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, he's trying really hard to, discourage Trump from imposing those tariffs on Japanese products. He kept stressing that Japan is the biggest foreign investor. Now, I believe truck maker Isuzu, they have announced a new investment. And do you think such investments will change Donald Trump's mind?
Well, investment was really one of the top key issues that the two leaders discussed in Washington. And, ISIS's official announcement has made it clear that it's opening a new plant in the United States. And, this was not a surprise because Mr. Ishiba gave Mr. Trump a heads up when they met and talked about this in front of the media. And according to ISIS's press release, the new plant will open in South Carolina with an investment worth $280 million. And it's expected to operate from mid-2027. And it will employ over 700 workers to produce over 60,000 units of vehicles annually as of 2030. And earlier we did hear that Japan's high-tech company SoftBank will invest millions in the U.S. as well. And Mr. Masayoshi Son has actually met Mr. Trump to deliver his plans. And in total, Mr. Ishiba himself promised Mr. Trump that Japan is committed to invest in the U.S. a total of $1 trillion, the most ever. And in 2023, Japan's investment to the U.S. was $783.3 billion, for your information.
Right. And Michio, let's say if the tariffs do go ahead in the month's time, how do you think that's going to impact Japan's economy?
Okay, well, Japan's steel export to the U.S. last year was 1.12 million tons, according to the Japanese Finance Ministry, or the sixth largest in the world. And some analysts say Japanese steel export to the U.S. includes high quality type that cannot be easily be made in the U.S. And if tariffs reduce the volume of steel from Japan to the U.S., it could hurt production in the U.S., including that of Japanese companies with factories or investment in the U.S. And that could translate into impacting local jobs. So it could hurt actually the U.S. economy more than the Japanese economy. But Mr. Ishiba said that his government is currently investigating the possible impact. Now, as to aluminum, Japan's export to the U.S. is limited. And analysts here think tariffs announced will not affect Japanese economy much. But the concern is what is next. Mr. Trump has hinted slapping tariffs on cars. And cars, as you know, are Japan's most important export items. So we have to wait and see what Mr. Trump will announce regarding tariffs on cars.
Oh, wait and see we shall. Thanks so very much, Michio Ishida, speaking to us from Tokyo. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is due to hold talks in London as the UK attempts to improve ties with Beijing. Ollie Barrett reports from London.
Wang Yi's visit to Europe also takes in a stop in Ireland and then at the end of the week the Munich Security Conference. But in London on Thursday he will meet with his counterpart David Lammy in the British capital, and they will co-host the China-UK Strategic Dialogue. That will be the first time that the UK and China have held talks under that format since 2018. Since then, the COVID pandemic, but also strained ties with the previous Conservative administrations here in the UK have got in the way of that format. This comes after David Lammy himself visited Beijing towards the end of last year, and Rachel Reeves, the finance minister, visited Beijing and Shanghai in a trip in January with a major focus on business and economic ties. We are told by government sources here in the UK that the foreign ministers will discuss a range of issues, including what they call international security and Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, and also topics ranging across the full breadth of the bilateral relationship, going on to say from areas of pragmatic cooperation to issues of contention. Now, in the cooperation sphere, we know that when David Lammy himself was in Beijing, issues from economic growth to the green transition to development to health to artificial intelligence were the type of issues that were discussed. And when it comes to that so-called contention sphere, government sources insist that they continue in their interactions with China to raise raise issues of concern around human rights, around Hong Kong, around the national security legislation, and around what they've previously described at the UK Foreign Office as China's supply of equipment to Russia's military industrial complex, which the UK says has been prolonging the war in Ukraine. Now, some Conservative UK MPs believe that the new strategy from the incoming government is wrong, and they believe that London is getting too close and too cosy with Beijing. The Labour government insists that the policy towards China from the previous Conservative governments was inconsistent and muddled. Now, Wang Yi's visit also comes at a time of controversy around China's plans for a vast new embassy here in the British capital. Indeed, his visit coincides with a local public inquiry hearing into that embassy. It was previously blocked by local authorities over a range of concerns, but China still hopes for a positive decision when it comes to that embassy, particularly if ties between Beijing and London can be seen to improve. Ollie Barrett, CNA, London.
Well, Deborah Wong also has more on this, basically what this visit by Wang Yi means for China.
The high-level talks on UK soil signify a shift in rocky bilateral relations after 6 years. Tensions mounted after the UK government criticised China over its handling of protesters during the 2019 social unrest in Hong Kong, and that was eventually followed by allegations of Chinese espionage in the UK last year. Ahead of Mr. Wang's visit, protesters demonstrated against China's plans to build a large embassy in a historic London site, and critics are saying that that project will threaten UK's national security as well as facilitate harassment of Chinese and Hong Kong dissidents who seek asylum in the UK. Now, that scheme, which became another source of tension between UK and China, is now under public inquiry. So this will likely come up during the meeting, which is also going to be held under the shadow of new US tariffs under the Trump administration. UK and China resumed a high-level economic dialogue last month where they pledged to cooperate on trade, tech and energy. UK is, after all, China's third largest trading partner in Europe. The Labour government's main foreign policy goal to improve ties with China, and in British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's words, to be consistent, respectful and pragmatic, does stand out against the more volatile US-China relationship. So this meeting could once again underline trade cooperation. Now, Mr. Wang will next visit Ireland and Germany, where he will speak at the Munich Security Conference about China's position on major international issues. Deborah Wong, CNA, Hong Kong.
In other news, 2 U.S. Navy ships have sailed through the sensitive Taiwan Strait for the first time since President Trump returned to office. China has slammed the exercise, emphasizing its sovereignty over Taiwan.
台湾是中国领土不可分割的一部分。台湾问题不是什么航行自由的问题，而是事关中国主权和领土完整的问题。中方坚决反对任何国家以航行自由为名，挑衅威胁中国的主权和安全。
Following the passage of the U.S. warships through the waterway, Chinese state media says that Beijing deployed its military around Taiwan for patrols and training missions. Taiwan says it detected more than 60 Chinese military aircraft and 7 Navy ships operating near the island, part of what Taipei considers as ongoing military pressure from Beijing. Well, the U.S. Navy earlier confirmed the transit, saying it occurred in a corridor that's beyond any coastal state's territorial seas and in accordance with international law. The U.S. routinely conducts such transits along the Taiwan Strait to reinforce its status as an international waterway. Now, a break is up next, but coming up on East Asia tonight, economies in the region scrambling to cut a favorable deal with the U.S. president as the specter of reciprocal tariffs loom. Plus, SoftBank plunges back into the red for its December quarter, surprising analysts. We'll be taking a look at those figures. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight. Well, it is now time for business news with none other than Olivia Mazuki. So, Liv, tell us all about the U.S. president's reciprocal tariffs. Apparently, it's triggering the economies and corporations to change their investment plans. Well, what's that all about?
Well, there's a lot of moving parts, I'll tell you. So we're getting reports of a Japanese automaker planning to set up a factory in the U.S., and the world's largest contract chip maker saying it can plan its production around new U.S. tariffs. We'll dive into those stories in just a bit, but before that, I'd like to bring your attention to the shares of embattled Chinese property developer China Wang Yi. They rallied nearly 17% on hopes that the firm might get a lifeline from the government. There are reports authorities are exploring a plan to help the developer and to plug a funding gap of about $6.84 billion this year. The proposed financial backing is a further sign that Beijing is doubling down on its support for the ailing property sector. A Bloomberg report says regulators will allocate around $3 billion in special local government bonds to buy unsold properties and vacant land from Wang Yi as part of the proposal. Now, Wang Yi and its affiliates will also be allowed to tap other financing sources, including new bond sales and bank loans for debt payments. While details of the plan could still change, investors see this as a sign that authorities are looking to ensure that the state-backed developer does not suffer the same fate as China Evergrande or other private firms that defaulted on their debt in recent years. Wang Yi faces some $7 billion of funding gap this year. A default by the bellwether firm would hurt home sales further and erode confidence in other state-controlled builders. That's as the country's housing crisis extends into its fourth year. Meanwhile, the report is boosting property stocks in Hong Kong today, with the Hang Seng's mainland property index closing nearly 6% firmer. Now, Asian economies are scrambling to negotiate with the U.S. ahead of Trump's planned reciprocal tariffs that will match other countries' higher import taxes. These are set to take effect in less than a week, and analysts warn that most emerging Asian economies could see higher U.S. import tariffs, except Singapore and Hong Kong. According to estimates by the World Trade Organization, most places in Asia applied higher average tariffs on imports compared with the U.S. as of 2024. South Korea imposed the highest tariffs on U.S. imports, reflecting a protective trade stance. In contrast, Vietnam and Thailand have lower tariffs, indicating more open trade ties. Now, the U.S. tariffs on Asian imports are generally low, suggesting a relatively open trade policy towards these partners. Now, as for trade surpluses with the U.S., China leads with nearly $300 billion as of last year. Vietnam follows with close to $124 billion, while Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea round out the top five. Though most of these economies have avoided tariffs so far, analysts warn that they should not assume they're safe. China is already facing an additional 10% blanket tariff under Mr. Trump's plan, and although its surplus puts it at risk, China has retaliated with modest tariffs on U.S. imports. Beijing is also adopting a diversified approach, using regulatory measures and leaving room for negotiations to avoid further escalation. Japan, which has a comparatively smaller surplus, is working to maintain its strong links with the U.S. According to analysts, Japan's relatively low tariff rates may provide a shield from the heavy tariff hikes. Now, Vietnam, with a growing trade surplus, is concerned about potential tariffs. Hanoi is seeking compromises, including boosting U.S. imports to avoid higher duties. Meanwhile, India, with a significant surplus, is reducing its high tariffs on U.S. imports to avoid higher duties, particularly on motorcycles and electronics. And Japan's Isuzu Motors has announced it would build a new manufacturing plant in the U.S. as Japanese car makers find themselves in the firing line for higher tariffs. It will be investing $280 million for the unit in South Carolina. Isuzu plans to have the site up and running by 2027. It aims to employ more than 700 workers there by 2028 and produce 50,000 vehicles annually by 2030. The move comes amid potential tariffs on goods from Mexico and Canada, and that spells trouble for car makers reliant on manufacturing plants in both countries where they build or assemble autos for the U.S. market. It also comes on the heels of Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's meeting with the U.S. president last week, where Ishiba signaled a readiness to favor U.S. interests by pledging to raise Japanese investment in America to $1 trillion. Isuzu appears and investors don't appear to be welcoming the additional spending. The stock of Isuzu trading down about 1.5% by the closing bell today. And the world's biggest contract electronics manufacturer, Foxconn, is optimistic about tackling new U.S. tariff developments. Chairman Yong Liu says, depending on the tariffs, the company will outline different production capacities accordingly. Mr. Liu added that Foxconn will make relevant arrangements with its partners in the U.S. Foxconn, which is Apple's main iPhone maker, has factories in both the U.S. and Mexico. While downplaying the tariffs' impact on the company, Mr. Liu acknowledges that tariffs overall will not be good for the world economy and will therefore shrink markets. While Foxconn has signaled an interest in buying Renault's stake in Nissan, it has approached both the car makers for potential collaboration. The Taiwanese company's chairman says that Foxconn's aim is cooperation rather than acquisition. He added that the company is open to purchasing shares in Nissan if necessary, but its main objective is still forming partnerships within the auto industry. The Taiwanese electronics giant, best known as Apple's main production partner, had previously considered acquiring Renault's 36% stake in Nissan. It had also been watching Nissan and Honda's potential tie-up, which is now facing challenges due to internal differences, according to sources. With those talks now appearing to stall, Foxconn has renewed its interest in Nissan as part of its broader push into new electric vehicles. Sources say Nissan is looking for fresh partnerships and is open to working with companies like Foxconn. Following that latest development, Nissan's shares fell more than 8% before paring some of those losses, while Foxconn stock slipped about 1% by the close of trade in Taiwan. Well, it's another dramatic swing for SoftBank Group's performance for the quarter ending December. It reported a net loss of $2.4 billion for the 3 months to December, surprising analysts on the downside. And this marks a significant decline compared to a profit of $6.3 billion during the same quarter last year. The loss was driven by a drop in the valuations of e-commerce platform Coupang and other tech companies' investment held by its Vision Fund unit. Analysts had expected a profit of around $1.6 billion. The loss raises concerns about SoftBank's plan to fund one of its most ubiquitous and ambitious undertakings yet, a major investment in OpenAI. Sources indicated that SoftBank was in talks to invest up to $25 billion in ChatGPT creator OpenAI, with recent reports suggesting the figure has grown to about $40 billion, part of which would be syndicated to other investors. SoftBank has also committed to investing $15 billion in Stargate, a venture with OpenAI and Oracle. Well, it has been less than a month since China's DeepSeek upended the global tech market, pulling the financial center of gravity towards China. Since then, China tech stocks have been booming, and with the Hang Seng Tech Index up an astounding 21% in just the past month. The gains reflect growing investor interest in China as Chinese tech companies Alibaba, Baidu, and Xiaomi continue to outperform the Nasdaq 100. Shares of internet giant Alibaba also closed more than 8% higher today after it announced that it will work with Apple to develop AI features on iPhone for the Chinese market. Chinese online retailers feeling the pinch after U.S. President Donald Trump scrapped a duty exemption that their small parcels benefit from. Temu and Shein suffered a major fall in their U.S. sales in the week following the move. Shein sales slid 16% to 41% for 5 days from Wednesday last week, while Temu saw a 32% plunge in the same period. That's based on Bloomberg's second measure, which looks into credit card and debit card spending data. While the spending drop roughly equals the typical post-Christmas fall-off, it reversed the growth trend seen in late January, and it lasted through the first week of February. The recent pullback in shopping trend started a day after Trump said that parcels under $800 from China would no longer be duty-free. And that was a category that covers most of Shein and Temu's U.S.-bound shipments. Well, experts believe that American shoppers may be put off by fears of higher price tags, but they also factor in other possible reasons, including seasonality, market competition, and macroeconomic challenges. Temu and Shein had been leveraging the small parcel rule to deliver cheap goods to American consumers tariff-free. Well, they're now scrambling to skirt the impact of tariffs by Trump, and Shein has reportedly asked some of its top suppliers in China to set up new factories in Vietnam. Meanwhile, Temu is said to be giving up control of its Chinese supply chain with a so-called half-custody framework. As of last year, there's an estimated $46 billion worth of small parcels shipped to the U.S. Well, that's all I have in business, Ottilie.
That's plenty. Thanks so very much, Olivia, there from the business desk. Well, time now for another break. But coming up next on East Asia tonight, North Korea joins in on the chorus of those denouncing the U.S. President Trump's proposal to take over Gaza. And we take a closer look at the stories of Thai hostages that Hamas recently released. The men returned home last week after being held for more than a year in Gaza. Tokyo sends in a formal request to Washington asking for an exemption from U.S. President Trump's 25% aluminium and steel tariffs. The transit of 2 U.S. Navy ships reigniting tensions in the Taiwan Strait, sparking an angry response from Beijing, who accused Washington of increasing security risks. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi visits London, where he is due to hold talks with his British counterpart, David Lammy. The Philippines is looking to buy more military hardware to modernize its arsenal, including more anti-ship missiles from India and at least 2 submarines. Manila is on its third phase of its military modernization program and has set aside $35 billion for the build-up over the next 10 years. Well, the move comes amid escalating tensions with China in the South China Sea. Philippine Armed Forces Chief Romeo Brawner says that the military has observed an increase in what he called illegal, coercive and deceptive actions by China in the disputed waters. Chinese authorities have previously said their actions in the region were lawful. Meanwhile, China's military issued a statement saying it has conducted a routine patrol in the South China Sea and has hit back at the Philippines, accusing it of actions that deliberately undermined peace and stability. Well, uncertainty is shrouding the ceasefire deal in Gaza. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is threatening to resume the war if Hamas does not free hostages by midday local time on Saturday. Now, his ultimatum follows Hamas's calling off the release of captives, accusing Israel of violating terms of the truce deal.
ההחלטה שהעברתי בקבינט פה אחד היא זאת. אם חמאס לא יחזיר את חטופינו עד שבת בצהריים, הפסקת האש תיפסק וצה"ל יחזור ללחימה עצימה עד להכרעה סופית של החמאס.
Mr. Netanyahu's comments echo remarks made by his ally Donald Trump, who warned all hell will break out if Hamas does not meet the deadline. It's unclear, though, whether the Israeli leader is calling for the release of all captives, as Mr. Trump did, or just the 3 scheduled to be freed this weekend. Well, the Prime Minister has also ordered the military to gather forces inside and around Gaza. The IDF announced the deployment of additional troops, including reservists And Hamas has also issued a statement following Mr. Netanyahu's threat, saying it is committed to the truce deal. It also repeated its rejection of President Trump's plan to empty Gaza of its residents. Well, meantime, President Trump has doubled down on his idea for the U.S. to take control of Gaza as he hosted Jordan's king at the White House. King Abdullah is the first Arab leader to meet Mr. Trump after he floated his controversial plan.
Mr. President, I think we have to keep in mind that there is a plan from Egypt and the Arab countries. We're being invited by Mohammed bin Salman to discussions in Riyadh. I think the point is how do we make this work in a way that is good for everybody?
It's not a complex thing to do. And with the United States being in control of that piece of land, a fairly large piece of land, you can have stability in the Middle East for the first time. And the Palestinians, or the people that live now in Gaza, will be living beautifully in another location.
The Jordanian ruler told President Trump Arab nations will come to the U.S. with a counter-proposal, adding that he needed to do what is best for his country. He also said that Jordan will take in some 2,000 sick children displaced in Gaza. Well, several Arab nations have rejected Mr. Trump's idea, warning that it could risk further expanding the conflict in the Middle East. The U.S. leader earlier threatened to withhold aid from Jordan and Egypt if they refused to accept Palestinians. North Korea has condemned U.S. President Donald Trump's proposal to take over Gaza, calling his suggestion to relocate Palestinians ludicrous. Well, state media KCNA accused Washington of trying to expand its influence in the Middle East by displacing Gaza's residents and taking control of the territory. The report also criticized the Trump administration over its calls to take over the Panama Canal and Greenland, and its decision to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. KCNA described the U.S. as a usurper that violates the rights of other countries for its own interests. Comments come amid rising tensions in the Korean peninsula. Just a day earlier, Pyongyang lashed out at the arrival of a U.S. nuclear-powered submarine in South Korea's southeastern port of Busan, vowing to exercise its right to punish the provokers. 5 Thai hostages freed in an unexpected release last month have finally returned home after more than a year in captivity in Gaza. Well, CNA's Saksitsa Sombat has been following their journey since the day they were captured.
One of them would be Pongsak Tena from Buriram province. And when we heard from beforehand from our sources that he would be one of those people that were released, we of course called up his father, Virat Tena, who we contacted before, who we profiled before in our continuous coverage about that. And of course we asked him, have you heard of the news? And he said yes, he heard the news that he would be released. So that's why we then agreed to meet him, to see him at his home, and to follow his reactions, to see what is going to happen. And I'm going to show you one snippet about when we saw pictures, when we saw news about his release, but there was still a long wait for some confirmation. So let's take a look. Kun Pa, or father, as I call him as a polite way to address an older Thai man, has been waiting for hours. Then, shortly before 7 p.m., his phone rings.
ลุงบอกว่าอะไรนะครับการโทรมาบอกว่ามีการยืนยันแล้วว่าพงศักดิ์แทนาปล่อยออกมาแล้วครับได้แล้วครับผมโอเคครับผมรู้สึกยังไงดีใจมากเลย
Just incredibly moving, Saksith. The release of these men, that marks the start of their healing journey. Can you tell us what happened during their first few days of freedom?
Yes, indeed. So, of course, the question is, what is their condition? How are they, right? When we saw those pictures for the first time of their release and then being brought to a hospital in Israel outside of Tel Aviv, what struck to me and what struck to a lot of people is that how relatively well they looked, at least physically, and especially when you compare them to the Israeli hostages, they were a lot more thinner, a lot more paler to those people. Of course, the information was trickling not very quickly. Of course, there's concern by the authorities not to have the media storm in. Of course, we didn't want that. We didn't want that either. But through our sources, then we just got to hear a little bits and pieces of information. So physically, they're relatively well. Psychologically and mentally, of course, these 15 and 16 months have definitely left a mark. They were not able to sleep initially in the hospital rooms because it was too quiet. Actually, it was too still, and that's what we heard from our sources. Also, then they were asked about their captivities by Thai and Israeli authorities. We heard that they were kept at different locations and also moved around at different locations, but mostly they didn't see a lot of daylight as well. They were only being fed bread, but at least in these 5 people, there were no mentions of abuse, physical or psychologically. But then, of course, then the healing part begins, right? They met with Thai authorities. The Thai foreign minister was among the first ones to be there. The prime minister, Pattana Shinawatra, she called in from abroad. But what was the most important is that the family members of those Thai hostages were flown in to Israel to reunite with them. And I was told by sources over there said that definitely helped to give them a boost in spirit, so to speak, and that also prepared them for the long journey back home to Thailand.
And you can catch more on the story of the Thai hostages on this week's CNA correspondent, They're Coming Home, which airs tonight, 9:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. South Korea says that it will come up with new legal measures to enhance school safety for students. This comes after the fatal stabbing of a first grader by a teacher at her school in Daejeon on Monday. CNA's Lim Yun-suk has more.
South Korean Education Minister Lee Ju-ho held a meeting with officers in Seoul on Wednesday to discuss possible measures that would prevent the recurrence of events like Monday's fatal stabbing of an 8-year-old by a teacher at her elementary school. He proposed a new law, the Hanuri Act, named after the student who died, that would require teachers to take leave if they were thought to be unable to perform their duties due to mental illness.
복직 시 정상 근무의 가능성 확인을 필수화하는 등 적절한 대책도 마련하겠습니다. 또한 교원이 폭력성 등으로 특이 증상을 보였을 때 긴급하게 개입할 수 있는 방안을 강구하겠습니다.
Mr. Lee also announced other moves to improve school safety and protect students.
신학기를 앞둔 학부모님들의 불안과 우려가 높다는 것을 알고 있습니다. 교육당국은 학교 안전을 빈틈없이 점검하고 외부인의 학교 출입 통제, 학교 내 안전 강화, 넓음 학교 안전 관리 등 안전 대책을 면밀히 살피도록 하겠습니다.
The measures were proposed on Wednesday, 2 days after the stabbing incident that has left the country in shock.
저 부모 입장에서는 아이가 가장 안전해야 될 곳이 학교인데 학교에서 그런 일이 일어났다는 것 자체가 일단은 말할 수 없을 정도로 놀랄 일이고 끔찍한 일이죠.
시인이 아프다고 해서 마음이 아프다고 해서 아이를 그렇게 계획해서 범행을 했다고 정말로 잘못한 사건이고 당연히 이제 처벌을 받아야 된다고 생각하고요.
Experts say there are currently no legal provisions or measures in place to separate a teacher with mental health issues from students, even if there are warning signs. And teachers can return to work simply by submitting a doctor's note. And that's what this teacher, believed to be in her 40s, did. According to the police, the teacher had earlier requested a 6-month leave of absence in December, citing depression. But she returned to work the same month after a doctor assessed her to be fit to do so. Local media reported that upon her return, she displayed violent behavior several times. Education officers were called in to investigate, but they only recommended that she take leave and be separated physically from the other teachers. Lim Yun-suk, CNA, Seoul.
Well, time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, we are heading over to New Delhi.
I'm Roland Lim, live at India Energy Week in New Delhi. Just ahead, find out how Japanese industrial giant Kawasaki Heavy Industries is working globally to deal with President Trump's tariffs and U.S.-China tensions.
And Beijing's space agency launches a new carrier rocket designed to send more satellites into orbit at one go. Observers say it's a step towards countering Elon Musk's Starlink. Well, the chairman of Kawasaki Heavy Industries says that geopolitical tensions and the threat of tariffs from the U.S. pose major challenges for the Japanese industrial giant. Well, CNA's Roland Lim spoke to Yoshinori Kanehana on the sidelines of India Energy Week in New Delhi, and he joins us live for more. So, Roland, Kawasaki Heavy, they're trying to avoid fires on a number of fronts?
Right, Oteli, Kawasaki Heavy Industries, a major player in the global manufacturing space. It spans everything almost, aerospace, motorcycles, trades. It has significant operations across the world, including the US, Mexico, and Japan. And earlier, I sat down with Yoshinori Kanehana, who is chairman of Kawasaki Heavy Industries, here at India Energy Week to discuss President Trump's tariffs and US-China tensions and how they're impacting the company's global strategy.
At the moment, the geopolitical the tensions are rising up, and we are producing a lot of things outside Japan. For example, we have a large facility in United States producing the buggy, four-wheel buggy, and the rolling stock, and a part for the aircraft. And in Thailand, we have a large factory to produce a motorcycle. So as you mentioned, the geopolitical tensions are very much the problem. Maybe the problem for us because of the supply chain. Until up to now, the supply chain was reasonably moving, but the tensions between the United States and China is going up. And recently, Trump announced increased the tariff from Canada and Mexico, so we're hoping so that we shift the production in between United States and Mexico. And for the global supply chain, we are considering where to make some parts or avoiding as much as possible to avoid the global supply chain conflict.
Okay. So Trump has even threatened levies on a close ally like Japan. My question to you is, if these tariffs do take place, how much of an impact to your bottom line will it make, if at all? Say, for example, 10% levies on Japanese companies.
How? Our Prime Minister said he couldn't answer to the theoretical question, but I will. Actually, first thing we need to do is shift the products, so that
which you have already done.
And still, we are producing some parts in Japan to export to US. So probably possibility is we should or we will move the location of the production from Japan to United States as much as possible, and probably shift the production to the other country where, I don't know, United States will put the lower tariff or no tax country. So we need to shift the production globally as well as the supply chain. We need to consider from now.
Kawasaki Heavy Industries, highly diversified company. You've got aerospace, energy, infrastructure. How do you see many more? How do you see Kawasaki maintaining its position over the next 5 years, especially with emerging technologies like AI? Are you also adopting?
Yes. We are using AI in various areas, but especially for the robotics. You know, the robotics are getting clever every year, so we are using AI. For example, we recently announced to start selling the robot called Banning. You know the truck, the people handling the box from the truck container to outside by hand, because the goods on the box is complicated. The size is different. So far the robot cannot take the different shape of a box to pick, but using AI with a camera, so the robot is more clever to pick up the size of the box and the suitable handling for the size of the box.
Would you say that AI augmented robotics is your fastest growing market right now?
Yeah, I think.
Kawasaki Heavy Industries has operations globally, worldwide. But in which particular markets are strategic priorities for you?
It's a difficult question because we want to put the strategic side on aircraft, also the motorcycle. So we are selling a motorcycle in all over the world. So the two areas, the motorcycle and the aircraft, the engines, and robot also.
Okay, so motorcycles. As Kawasaki Heavy Industries navigates challenges such as rising tariffs, shifting supply chains, the company is rethinking its global production and focusing on emerging technologies such as AI, as you've just heard, and robotics to maintain efficiency and competitiveness. Oteli, back to you.
Well, thanks so very much for that report. Roland Lim speaking to us from New Delhi. China has successfully launched a new rocket into space designed to carry more satellites in a single go. The Long March 8A rocket took its maiden voyage on Tuesday, carrying a group of low Earth orbit satellites. Now, these satellites constitute an internet constellation. Beijing has more than 10 such missions planned for 2025 as it aims to counter SpaceX's presence in Earth's lower orbits. Roughly 10,000 satellites are orbiting our planet right now, 7,000 of which belong to Elon Musk's Starlink. Now, these satellites are often used for internet connectivity and Earth observation. Beijing has set out its space goals to make the country the world's top space power by 2045. These plans include sending astronauts to the moon by 2030, building a moon base, and developing nuclear-powered space shuttles. And still ahead on Asia tonight, here are just some of the stories we'll be covering. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Indonesia, the second stop of his Asia tour, focusing on discussing economic and defense ties, as well as the war in Gaza. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi prepares for his reunion with U.S. President Trump at the White House, with trade, tariffs, and migrant deportations threatening to test ties between the two leaders. And the International Institute for Strategic Studies releases its annual assessment of the state of military readiness around the world. We'll be live in London and Beijing to hear from our correspondents, who will have a full analysis of this heavyweight research. All coming your way on Asia tonight, 8 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time, right here on CNA. And that does it for East Asia tonight this Wednesday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia and look us up on Facebook, on YouTube. Thanks for watching.